My fiancé vanished for 2 weeks on a bachelor party trip, then came back furious after I canceled our wedding and moved on without him. 16 days before my wedding, my phone turned into a tiny haunted house. It kept buzzing, glowing, going silent, and then failing at the one job it was built to do when I needed it most. My name is Maren. I was standing barefoot in my apartment kitchen in the United States, my feet cold against the tile, staring at a calendar packed with wedding errands, and trying to convince myself that the nerves were normal. The plan was supposed to be simple: confirm the deliveries, pick up my dress after the last tiny alterations, make sure the seating chart did not start a civil war, and then get through the final stretch before the wedding. And then my fiancé vanished. Not vanished like he was taking a long shower. Not vanished like he was driving somewhere with bad reception. I mean vanished, as in I called and got nothing texted, and got nothing. Called again and again until my thumb hurt, and the only thing I got back was that useless little message that basically says, "Your call is going nowhere." At first, I did the polite kind of panic. The normal person panic. Maybe he fell asleep early. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he was with his parents and it was loud. Maybe there was a completely reasonable explanation that would make me feel silly later. But by late afternoon, my stomach had that hollow, floating feeling like it was dropping out from under me. I called his mother because I did not know what else to do. She answered on the second ring with the exact tone of someone who already had a script prepared. She said, "Oh, hi, sweetie," like I had called just to chat. I told her I could not reach him and asked if he was with them. She paused, then said she had not seen him since yesterday, and that he was probably just busy, which was an insane thing to say when your son is about to get married. I called his father next. He sounded irritated, like I had interrupted something important. He told me to give it time, as if this was a late pizza and not my entire life going quiet. By evening, I had called everyone who mattered. His best friend, the guy who was supposed to stand next to him at the wedding, the friend who always made jokes at the wrong time, even a cousin I barely knew. Nothing. Nobody gave me an answer. Some people did not answer at all, and the few who did gave me the same vague nothing. "I haven't heard. He's probably fine. Relax." Relax. Sure. Totally. My brain went straight to the worst possible places, and I am not proud of that, but I also think any person in my situation would have done the same thing. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, my phone lit up with a notification from a social media app I barely used anymore. I almost ignored it because I was too tired to care, but the preview had one of his friends' names in it. My body moved before my pride could stop it. I opened it. And there it was, a photo dump. Bright lights, a crowded bar, drinks lifted in the air, and my fiancé right in the middle of it, grinning like he did not have a wedding coming up, and a fiancé losing her mind on a couch. The location tag showed a party city across the country, not a neighboring town, not a quick road trip, not even just another state nearby, a whole time zone away. I stared at the screen so long my eyes watered. I remember whispering out loud, "You've got to be kidding me," like the room might laugh with me. I zoomed in on his face, and I felt this wave of heat climb up my neck. He did not look scared. He did not look lost. He did not look regretful. He looked carefree. He looked like the version of him I used to love at parties in college, the version who could shrug off responsibility like it was a jacket. Except this time, the responsibility was me. So that is how the last 2 weeks before my wedding started. Me in sweatpants, smelling like anxiety, watching my fiancé party on the other coast while my stomach tried to fold itself into a knot. And if you are wondering how I handled it, the honest answer is not well. By the time the sun came up, I had done what any sane person would do after finding out her fiancé ran off to the other side of the country without telling her. I turned into an amateur investigator, fueled by rage and caffeine. I looked up the bar from the tag. I checked flight times like I was planning a rescue mission. I scrolled through every picture like one of them might suddenly reveal a hidden explanation. And I kept telling myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe he had somehow been dragged there against his will. I know. I was bargaining with the universe like a clown, but the timestamps were current, and the comments were worse. People were cheering him on, calling it the best send-off, telling him to live it up. There were little inside jokes that made it obvious this was not some spontaneous detour. This was planned. This was celebrated. This was a group decision that apparently did not include the woman he was supposed to marry. I texted him anyway, because anger makes you do embarrassing things. I wrote, "Where are you?" Then, "Are you kidding me?" Then, because I could not stop myself, "Come home on the next flight, or there won't be a wedding." I sent that at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I immediately regretted the ultimatum because it made me sound like a cartoon villain. But also, what else was I supposed to say? "Have fun, babe. Try not to lose your ID." Hours passed. Then 12 more hours passed. My phone stayed quiet, except for my mother calling me twice, which I ignored because I did not have the energy to explain that my fiancé had apparently joined an out-of-state party tour. Finally, late the next night, he called. The first thing I noticed was the background noise. Laughter, music, voices overlapping. He was still in the middle of it. I answered with my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to break free from my body. I said his name like a warning. He did not even start with "I'm sorry." He started with, "Okay, you need to calm down." If you have ever been told to calm down while you are actively experiencing betrayal, you know it is basically gasoline. He said the trip was a surprise bachelor thing his college friends had planned months ago. He said it like that made it cute instead of insulting. He admitted he had known about it a few days before leaving, but he had not told me because I would overreact. He used that exact word. Like my feelings were an annoying habit. He said the flights, the rental, and the whole thing had already been paid for, and it was 2 full weeks, so obviously he could not just bail. 2 weeks, I repeated. He laughed like I was being dramatic for not finding that romantic. I told him we had already talked about not doing that kind of thing, not disappearing, not turning the lead up to our wedding into some frat memory. He said I was controlling, and I swear I could hear his friends in the background going, "Oh," like this was entertainment. He said he deserved one last experience before getting married so young. Then he hit me with, "You'll understand when you stop trying to manage everything." I did not manage everything. I managed the seating chart, the bills, the communication, the emotional labor, and, apparently now, the consequences of him acting like a teenager. Before I could even finish telling him what I thought of that, he hung up on me. When I called back, it went straight to nothing. Later, I found out he had blocked my number for a while, so I would not ruin the vibe. I stared at my phone like it was the punchline to a joke I did not want to be in. That was when the fear finally collapsed into something colder and sharper. Because fear at least assumes the person cares. This was him choosing not to care, and everyone around him cheering for it. And I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at our wedding date on a calendar like it was a prank somebody had pulled on me. The next day, I walked through my life like a ghost, doing normal errands with this insane secret buzzing under my skin. It was genuinely surreal. I went to the grocery store and picked up bananas like I was not secretly wondering if I was about to become the woman everyone whispered about, the woman whose wedding got canceled because she couldn't handle a boys' trip. I answered emails from vendors with polite little exclamation points while my jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. I tried on my dress, and the seamstress kept telling me how beautiful I looked, and I kept nodding like a doll because what was I going to say? "Thanks. My fiancé is currently on the other side of the country pretending I don't exist." My parents came over that evening because my mother had finally gotten me to answer a call, and I made the mistake of telling her the truth. I expected shock, maybe outrage on my behalf, maybe my father saying he was going to call the other family and demand answers. Instead, my mother did this long exhale and said, "Well, men do stupid things when they're nervous," like that was supposed to soothe me. My father asked if I was sure it was not a miscommunication, which is such a polite way to call your daughter gullible. I showed them the pictures. My mother's face tightened, but then she went right into problem-solving mode, which with her always meant, How do we make this look acceptable? She started talking about how close we were to the wedding, how much money had already been spent, how people would talk, and how I could not just throw everything away because he went on a trip. I stared at her and felt this weird, childlike panic because I realized she was not worried about me. She was worried about the optics. Meanwhile, his mother started texting me little guilt bombs. He's just trying to have a little fun. He loves you so much. Please don't punish him. Punish. Like I was his mother taking away his game system. It made me want to scream. That night I called him again from a different number. Yes, I did that. No, I am not proud. I told you I am not a saint. He answered, and I said, "Don't hang up." He laughed and said, "Oh my God, you're being intense." I asked him if his parents knew, and he hesitated just long enough for the truth to slide out. They knew. They had known the whole time. That was why his mother sounded so calm when I called. That was why his father told me to give it time. They were not worried. They were covering. It was not just him. It was a whole little team of people who had decided I did not deserve honesty. I told him very clearly that I was canceling the wedding if he did not come home immediately. He told me I was embarrassing him. Then he said, "You don't want to be that girl who freaks out and ruins everything." Like my main fear should have been being perceived as difficult. Then he said he was not coming back early because he had spent a lot of money and he was not letting me tell him what to do. That word again. Like asking for basic respect was dictatorship. When he hung up, I sat on my bedroom floor and stared at the hem of my dress hanging in the closet. I felt this split inside me. Part of me wanted to cling to the plan, to the idea that love means compromise, forgiveness, and working through things. And another part of me, the part that had been swallowing little disappointments for years, stood up quietly and said, "No, not this." The truth is, that trip did not come out of nowhere. It was just the loudest version of who he had always been when his friends were watching, and who I had always been when I was trying to keep things smooth. I just did not know it would blow up like this right before I was about to legally tie myself to it. So on the third day, with my hands shaking and my stomach empty, I opened my laptop, pulled up the guest list, and made the decision that would change everything. And yes, my hands were still unsteady while I did it, because being sure does not mean being calm. Canceling a wedding is not one big dramatic movie moment where you run down an aisle in slow motion and everybody gasps. It is 1,000 small humiliations. It is spreadsheets, emails, deposit policies, and sitting in your living room writing the same sentence over and over, trying to make it sound less insane. The wedding is no longer happening. It is also realizing in real time how many people are invested in your relationship as entertainment. I started with the venue, and I cried on the phone because the coordinator was kind. I hated that she was kind, because kindness made it real. The cancellation fee was brutal, and I had to say out loud that I understood it was policy. Yes, I understood. Yes, I would pay. I called the caterer next, then the florist, then the person doing the music. Each call felt like ripping off another layer of skin. I could practically hear dollars evaporating, and in the back of my mind I kept thinking, I'm paying to be disrespected. Love that for me. Then came the guests. There were a lot of them. Not because I'm some social butterfly, but because our families are the type that treat weddings like community events, like a public announcement of status. I did not want to send one cold mass message, but I also did not have the emotional strength to individually explain the situation 150 times. So I did this weird in-between thing, where I sent personal-ish messages that were still basically copy and paste. I told people he had disappeared for an out-of-state trip without warning, that he refused to come back, and that I could not move forward. I asked them not to contact him about it yet, because I needed space to manage the fallout. And yes, I realize now that asking people not to gossip is like asking a toddler not to touch a puddle. Of course someone told him. I found out because his best friend, the same one who had ignored my calls, suddenly texted me. He's upset. What did you do? What did I do? That sentence still sits in my brain like a splinter. I replied, tell him to come home. His friend wrote back, "You're making this worse," as if it was not already worse. As if I had some magical dial I could turn to make betrayal more convenient. My parents came back over and tried to talk me out of it. My mother kept saying, "You're going to regret this." My father kept saying, "People will talk." I finally snapped and said, "People are already talking. They're just not talking about him." That shut him up for maybe 10 seconds. Then my mother went right back to the idea that I was ruining my own life because I could not compromise. Compromise, in their minds, meant accepting disrespect quietly. His mother called me, and her voice was shaky in that performative way. She said he was confused he loved me, and he had made a mistake. I said he's still there. She went quiet. Then she tried to change the subject to my tone, to how I was speaking to her, to how I should watch my words. I laughed. I actually laughed because I had nothing else left. I said, "You lied to me on the phone while he was partying on the other coast." She said she was protecting him. I said, "So you weren't protecting me?" And she did not answer. That night I sat with my laptop open, staring at the total amount I had lost in deposits and fees, and I felt this sick mix of grief and rage. I was not rich. I worked a normal office job. I paid rent. I budgeted groceries. I saved for this wedding by skipping small pleasures like takeout and new clothes. And now that money was gone because a group of grown adults had decided my boundaries were inconvenient. It did not feel fair. It did not feel empowering. It did not feel like one of those clean moments people talk about when they say, "I chose myself." But for one night at least, I slept. It was not peaceful sleep. It was the exhausted kind of sleep where your body shuts down because it has no choice. Somewhere under the panic, though, there was this tiny, stubborn feeling of relief, like my future had just narrowly avoided a trap. He stayed the full 2 weeks. I know you probably already guessed that because, of course, he did. The man who could block his fiancé to protect the trip mood was not going to suddenly become responsible because I asked nicely. He posted pictures like nothing was happening, and I watched them like an idiot, even though each one made me feel worse. I would tell myself I was checking for signs of remorse, and then I would end up staring at background details, trying to see if there were women in the group, trying to read his body language like I was a detective in a bad relationship mystery. It is embarrassing, but I am telling you because it is true. When he finally came back, it was 2 days before what would have been our wedding. He went straight from the airport to my apartment like he was returning from a normal business trip. I know that because my neighbor texted me, "He's outside." My stomach dropped so fast I almost gagged. I had been bracing for that moment for days. But bracing does not mean you are ready. It just means you are tense while you wait to get hit. He knocked, and I did not open. He knocked again, louder. I stayed behind the door like a kid hiding from a teacher. Then he started talking through the door, and it was so absurd I almost laughed because he sounded like he was trying to negotiate a minor argument. He said, "Okay, let's just talk. Come on, this is ridiculous." When I still did not open, he shifted into guilt mode. "Do you know how much people are counting on us?" Like the wedding existed for the guests, not for the relationship. After about 20 minutes of this, I opened the door, but only enough to see his face and make sure he could see mine. He looked tired, a little sunburned. He was carrying a duffel bag that probably smelled like airports and bad decisions. He smiled like he thought his charm would fix it, like he would walk in and I would melt because he was finally back. Then he saw my expression and the smile faltered. I said, "It's canceled." The way his face changed was honestly the first satisfying thing I had felt in days. His mouth fell open, his eyes got wide. For a second, he looked like someone had switched languages on him. Then he blinked and said, "No, it's not." Like he could just deny reality into submission. I told him I had canceled the venue, the vendors, everything. I told him I had notified the guests. I said it calmly, which surprised me. I had imagined myself screaming, throwing things, being cinematic. Instead, I was just flat, like my emotions had burned themselves out. He started talking fast, tripping over his own words. He said he did not think I would actually do it. He said he thought I was bluffing. He said he was sorry and he would make it up to me. Then he cried. Not pretty tears. More like a panicky, messy collapse. He reached for my hands, and I stepped back because I did not want his skin on me. That was when he got angry, because sadness was not working. He said I was punishing him. He said I was being dramatic. He said I was throwing away 5 years over one trip. He kept saying one trip like it was a weekend at a cabin, not an out-of-state disappearance with intentional lies. I told him he did not just take a trip. He took a vote on whether I mattered, and he voted no. I leaned my forehead against the doorframe and listened to him breathe on the other side, and I felt this weird ache in my chest, because even though he deserved the consequences, he was still someone I had loved. But love does not erase disrespect. It does not pay back deposits. It does not unhumiliate you in front of your whole community. Eventually, he left. I sank onto the floor in the entryway like my legs had been borrowed. My phone started buzzing almost immediately because apparently he went straight to his mother and she went straight to my mother, and my mother went straight to the idea that I had embarrassed her personally. It was like a relay race of blame, and I was the baton. The days after he came back were an exhausting loop of messages, calls, and people acting like my boundaries were a group inconvenience. His mother called so much I started recognizing her number pattern without even looking. My father texted me long paragraphs about forgiveness and maturity, like he had suddenly become a motivational speaker. My mother showed up at my door once without warning. When I did not open, she left a voicemail that sounded like she was crying, but the words were all about reputation. What people were saying at church, how I was making the family look unstable. I listened to it and felt this cold resentment settle in. Why did nobody care about how unstable I felt when my fiancé vanished? He tried different tactics. At first, it was apologies. Long messages about how he loved me, how he had been stupid, how he wanted to prove himself. Then it turned into anger when I did not respond. You're really going to do this? So you're just going to ignore me now? Like he was the victim of silence, not the person who had weaponized silence by blocking me while he partied. His friends joined in, which was honestly the grossest part. I got messages from people I barely knew telling me to give him a chance and stop being dramatic. I would sit there thinking, why are you so invested in my humiliation being reversible? It felt like they wanted the story to end in forgiveness, because that would make them less guilty for encouraging him. My job became a weird stage too, because of course the gossip made its way there. I worked in a plain office, nothing fancy, just a lot of emails and meetings and people pretending to be busy. I went in on Monday and tried to act normal, but my face must have been a billboard because a coworker asked if I was okay in that overly sweet tone that means they already know. Then another coworker made a joke about bachelor parties, and I laughed like it was funny because I did not want to cry at my desk. By lunchtime, I had heard my own story told back to me in fragments, and not always accurately. Then my mother said the thing that broke something in me. She said, "You always have to make a point," like my backbone was a personality flaw. That was when I realized that in their minds, I was not a daughter who was hurt. I was a daughter who was difficult. They did not want me to be safe or respected. They wanted me to be agreeable. His mother called again that night, and I answered because I wanted to stop the endless buzzing. She said he was not eating, he was not sleeping, he was destroyed. I said he was fine, across the country. She gasped like I was cruel. She told me I was being hard-hearted. Hard-hearted. Like I was supposed to soften so he could feel better. I told her I needed my money back for the deposits and fees, at least half, because his choice had caused all of this. She said, "That's not fair." I laughed again, because I kept laughing whenever things got absurd. It was like my body did not know what else to do when someone tried to rewrite reality. Not fair was my fiancé disappearing and making me pay to cancel. When I hung up, I looked around my apartment and felt this strange loneliness, because I had expected my family to be my team. Instead, they were acting like I was a problem to manage. I sat on the edge of my bed and thought, maybe this is what growing up actually is. Not getting older, not paying bills, but realizing that the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes just want you to be convenient. And yes, that thought made me cry. Ugly cry. Face in a pillow. Because I was not just grieving a relationship. I was grieving the fantasy that the people around me would choose me when it mattered. A week after the cancellation, I started hearing the new version of me. the version my ex-fiancé was telling everybody about. And honestly, it was impressive how quickly he turned himself into a victim. Suddenly, I was not Maren, the woman who got blindsided. I was Maren, the woman who would not let him have friends. I was Maren, the woman who tracked his phone, which I never did because I am not a spy, and also because I did not want to know that much. I was Maren, the woman who made him miserable, which was news to me. Sure, we had normal arguments like every couple, but miserable? That was an interesting rewrite. At first, I tried to ignore it because I thought the truth would speak for itself. Cute thought. The truth does not spread unless you tell people yourself. And I was too tired to be my own public relations team. Meanwhile, he was out there telling people I had issues, telling them I overreacted, telling them he had to escape for his own sanity. Escape? From what? From making a phone call and saying, "Hey, I'm going across the country for 2 weeks." One mutual friend, someone I had known since college, called me and said, "He's saying you were abusive." Abusive. That word made my ears ring. I asked what he meant, and he said my ex was telling people I used guilt and ultimatums and isolated him. I felt this cold nausea because I could see exactly what he was doing. He was not just protecting his image. He was rewriting our entire relationship so his betrayal looked like self-defense. So instead of fighting everyone publicly, I did something quieter and maybe more pathetic. I told a few people the truth in private, and I watched which ones believed me. It was like a friendship lie detector. Some people immediately said, "That's insane," and they stayed in my life. Others hesitated, tried to see both sides, and I felt this icy distance form. Because if you can see both sides of someone disappearing to the other coast without telling their partner right before the wedding, then maybe you are not my person. My parents, of course, did not help. My mother actually said, "Well, you can be intense." Like intensity was the same thing as abuse. I told her, "You're buying his story because it's easier than admitting he lied." She snapped that I was making her choose. But wasn't she choosing already? Then she did something I still cannot believe, even though it happened. She gave me an ultimatum. She said if I did not at least meet with him and talk like adults, I was not welcome at their house for a while, because she could not handle the tension. I stared at her and felt this weird calm, like my brain had finally run out of shock. I said, "So you're choosing him?" She said I'm choosing peace. Peace apparently meant me swallowing my feelings so everyone could pretend nothing had happened. I left their house and sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying not to spiral. I wanted to call him and scream. I wanted to call my father and beg him to stand up for me. I wanted to call anyone who would tell me I was not crazy. So I blocked my ex-fiancé's number, not as revenge, but as self-defense, because my phone had become a pipeline for manipulation. I blocked his mother, too. And when my mother texted me later, asking why I was being extreme, I replied, "Because nobody else is protecting me." Then I turned my phone face down and tried to breathe like a person. The next morning I woke up, and my first instinct was to check my phone to see if the world had ended overnight, because apparently my brain now thought silence equaled danger. That was the moment I realized this was going to leave a mark. Not just on my relationship status, but on my nervous system. Love that for me. Again. The days right after the cancellation were a blur of cancellation emails, awkward calls, and trying to get through work without crying in the bathroom. About 10 days after I canceled everything, I got an email from his friends, the ones who had been out of state with him. Just seeing their names made my chest tighten. The subject line was something like, "We're sorry," which was hilarious because even their apology had a generic group project tone. I opened it anyway because curiosity is my toxic trait. It was long, and it was written like they were trying to sound mature, like they had all sat around and decided on the right words. The more I read, the worse I felt. They admitted they had encouraged him to ignore me. They said when he got nervous because I was texting so much, they told him I was just testing him. They wrote that phrase like it was a normal thing to say about a woman who was about to marry someone and could not reach him. Testing him. Like I was a villain in a game show, not a person with a life. They said they told him not to come home early because if he did, it would set a precedent that I could dictate his choices. There it was again. The same dynamic. They understood it as dominance. They admitted they had joked about me being upset and had called me the warden, and I nearly spilled my coffee right there at my desk. Then they tried to soften it by saying they did not realize how serious it was, that they thought he and I would laugh about it later, that they were caught up in the moment. But they were not caught up. They bought out-of-state tickets. They planned 2 weeks. They told him to block me. That is not being caught up. That is being deliberate. I did not even finish the email the first time. I scrolled down, saw the part where they started asking me to forgive him, and slammed my laptop shut like it was hot. I sat there breathing fast while an old familiar shame washed over me. Part of me wondered if maybe I had been too intense, too serious, too no fun. That is what years of being told you are a lot does to you. It makes you question your own reality, even when the evidence is literally glowing on a screen. Later, when I calmed down, I reopened the email and forced myself to read the rest, because I needed to know what I was dealing with. The ending was exactly what you would expect. They said he loved me, he was scared, he made a dumb choice, and I should consider giving him another chance. Then they added this little line about how weddings are bigger than 2 people, like my relationship was community property. I deleted the email and did not reply. And I felt this sharp clarity settle in. This was not just about a trip. This was about a whole network of people who thought my role in the relationship was to accept whatever they decided. I also started thinking about his family. How his mother would smile, compliment me, and then casually undermine me. How his father treated everything like a power struggle. I used to think I could marry him without marrying all of that. Now I realized I would have been walking into their system, and their system did not have room for me to be an equal. I finally called a therapist because my friends were supportive, but they could not be my emotional dumping ground forever. I needed someone who would not say, "Just forgive him," because they were tired of hearing about it. In the first session, I sat there twisting a tissue in my hands, and I kept saying, "I feel stupid." The therapist said, "You're not stupid. You're grieving." I hated how true that was, because I was not just grieving the wedding. I was grieving the version of my life I had already started living in my head. So yes, I started therapy because a group of grown men treated my relationship like a prank, and my family treated my pain like a public relations issue. That feels like a very modern American origin story, honestly. I went through the motions for the next few days, numb and exhausted, just trying to get from morning to night. 2 weeks after the cancellation, the practical mess started. Because breakups are not just emotional. They are logistical. And logistics do not care that you are heartbroken. We still had months left on our lease, and I learned fast that fighting him would cost more than the penalty to break it. We had shared utilities, a shared credit card we used for wedding expenses, and a bunch of tiny subscriptions that kept putting his name next to mine like a bruise. I contacted him through a therapist-suggested structured communication plan, which basically meant I sent a calm message asking for a time to talk about financial separation. He responded hours later with, "Why are you being like this?" Then he said he would not pay any of the cancellation fees because canceling had been my decision. I read that line and felt rage spike through me again, because the way he framed it made it sound like I had woken up bored and decided to cancel the wedding for fun. It was like he had no concept that actions have consequences, unless the consequences were happening to him. I asked him to at least split the credit card balance because both of us had benefited from the planning. He said, "I didn't make you cancel." That became his favorite sentence for a while. He did not make me cancel. He just made the situation impossible and then acted like my reaction was optional. In the end, I paid off the shared credit card myself over the next several months because I needed his name out of my finances more than I needed to be right in the argument. I told his parents I needed to arrange a time for him to pick up his things, and his mother tried to put him on the phone like she was running a hostage negotiation. I said no. She said, "You're being childish." I had to remind myself not to scream because screaming just gives people an excuse to call you unstable. I told her I would leave his things in boxes by the door. She said I was cold. I said I learned from the best. Yes, I said it. It felt good for about 5 seconds. I went back to my desk trying to look normal, and my boss pulled me aside to ask if everything was okay because I seemed distracted lately. Not ideal. My life was collapsing, and the main concern was office mood. If there is a theme here, it is people prioritizing comfort over my humanity. At home, my mother called and said my father was so disappointed. She asked if I realized I was breaking the family. I told her he broke the relationship. She said, "But you broke the wedding." Like the wedding was the sacred thing, not me. Then she went further. She said if I did not stop being stubborn, I should not come to the house for Sunday dinner, because it would be awkward. I said, "Okay." She sounded surprised, like she expected me to beg. I did not beg. I was tired of begging. I hung up and cried, but the crying felt different this time. Less panicked, more like a release. If they were going to punish me, at least I was not going to perform for them. That weekend, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes, because I decided I could not stay there anymore. Not with all the wedding memories soaked into the walls. I started looking for a cheaper place, something I could afford on my own without feeling like I was paying rent to a ghost. I scrolled through listings, talked to landlords, and did the normal adult stuff, while my heart kept doing this annoying thing where it would suddenly remember him and ache like a bruise pressed too hard. The therapist told me to write down what I needed to be true, like a reality anchor. So I wrote it. He chose a secret out-of-state trip. He blocked me. His family lied. His friends encouraged it. I canceled because I did not want to marry someone who could treat me like an obstacle. I wrote it over and over until the words felt less shaky. That was how I started rebuilding. Not in some inspirational way, not with music swelling in the background, just in a messy, practical, angry way. One phone call and one box at a time. After that, the calendar kept moving, even though I felt stuck in place. 3 weeks after he got back, he finally showed up to collect his things. And he brought his father as emotional backup, which told me everything about how he planned to handle it. The night before, his mother texted me from someone else's phone to get around the block. It was a half-apology, half-warning message saying they were sorry things had escalated and that they hoped I would be reasonable. Reasonable? As if the unreasonable thing here was not a grown man disappearing across the United States. I did not want to be home when they came because I did not trust myself to stay calm, and I did not want to give them a scene they could twist into a story. So I asked my neighbor, a sweet older woman who had basically adopted the hallway, if she could be there as a witness. She said yes, and she brought a little folding chair and set it by my door, like she was ready for the show. I love her for that, honestly. They arrived in the afternoon. I heard the knock and my stomach flipped, but I opened the door with my shoulders squared like I was walking into a meeting. His father nodded at me without warmth, and my ex stood behind him holding empty boxes, looking smaller than I remembered. They did not come in like they belonged there anymore, because they did not. But they did step inside like they were doing me a favor by being polite. My ex stood there holding a box and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes like he wanted me to rescue him from himself. He said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Talk about what?" He said, "About us." That word, us, felt wrong in the room. He started crying again, those same messy panic tears. He said he was sorry. He said he was scared. He said he did not know why he had done it. He said he did not think I would actually cancel. I told him I needed the truth, not the performance. He nodded like he understood. Then he said something that cracked the whole thing open. He told me that while he was still out of state, he kept thinking I might call it off, and that thought did not scare him the way it should have. He said he had been anxious for months about getting married. He had been anxious about feeling trapped, and he did not have the guts to be the one to end it. When his friends pushed the trip, he went along with it because it gave him distance and a ready-made excuse. Then he said I thought if you ended it, then I wouldn't have to be the bad guy. I swear my whole body went cold. It was not just that he lied. It was that he engineered a situation where my reaction would do his dirty work. He sabotaged our wedding so he could escape without owning it. I asked him if his friends knew that. He nodded. He said they had been telling him for months that he was too young to get married, that he should have one last blowout, that I was too serious, and he had let them feed his fear until it became a plan. He said his parents knew he was nervous, and they thought the trip would help him. That was such a twisted version of help that I almost laughed. I felt this surge of rage so sharp it scared me, because it was cleaner than sadness. I said, "So you used me." He tried to argue. He tried to say he loved me. He tried to say he was just confused. It did not matter. Love does not cancel out cowardice. I told him he had not just broken my trust. He had made me carry the blame for his exit. Then I said, "Get out." He looked like he wanted to say more, like he wanted to bargain, but my voice was steady. Finally, he lifted the box and walked toward the door. His father came back in right as he was leaving and asked if we were good. My ex did not answer. I said, "We're done." And that was it. That was the end of 5 years in a living room with half-empty shelves and a neighbor sitting in a folding chair like a guardian angel with opinions. After he left, I thought I would feel instant relief, like a switch had flipped. What I actually felt was a huge, heavy grief, because his confession did not just end things. It rewrote the whole past. It made me look back at every sweet moment and wonder if it had been real, or if he had just been trying to keep the relationship afloat until he could escape cleanly. That kind of doubt is toxic, because it spreads, and suddenly nothing feels solid. I spent that night sitting on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by boxes, staring at the wall like it had answers. I kept replaying his words. Part of me thought you might call it off. It hit me over and over that he had made me the villain in his story on purpose. He had set me up to look like the bad guy so he could feel free, and people bought it because it is easier to believe a woman is too much than to believe a man is cowardly. The next day I called my therapist and told her what he had said. She was quiet for a second, then asked me how it felt in my body. I wanted to throw my phone because that question always sounds so annoying. But then I realized my shoulders had been tight for weeks, and suddenly they were not. I told her it felt like clarity and nausea at the same time. She said, "That's your nervous system recognizing truth." I said, "Great. My nervous system has better judgment than my ex." I tried one last time with my parents. Not because I thought it would work, but because I needed to know I had tried. I went to their house and sat at their kitchen table, the same table where I used to do homework, and I told them what he had confessed. I told them he had sabotaged the wedding because he was too scared to end it himself. My mother's eyes widened for a second. My father frowned. For one tiny moment, I thought maybe, finally, they would understand. I said, "You care more about what people think than what happened to me." My mother got defensive, of course. She said she cared about me, but her version of caring was always conditional. It was like she cared as long as I behaved in a way that made her look good. I told her, "You're not on my side." She said, "I'm on the side of family." I said, "Then why am I alone?" My father finally spoke up and said, "Your mother just wants peace." I said, "Peace for who?" He did not answer. That was the moment I realized my father was not neutral. He was passive, and passivity always benefits the loudest person. So I left. I did not slam doors. I did not shout. I just left. I felt this strange floating sensation in my chest, like I was stepping off a ledge. In the car, I cried, because it hurts to accept that your parents might not be capable of giving you what you want. But when the tears stopped, there was calm behind them, a quiet, painful kind of calm. Like, okay, now I know. Over the next few days, I started cutting ties. I told my parents I needed space, and I blocked their numbers for a while, because every conversation was just them trying to negotiate my boundaries like they were buying a used car. I stopped answering mutual friends who wanted updates because I was not a reality show. I focused on moving closing accounts, paying bills, and doing the things grown women do when their life implodes and nobody hands them a manual. I found a smaller apartment across town, cheaper and quieter. Signing the lease made my fingers feel stiff, but it was not panic. It was adrenaline. Moving day was just a couple of friends, some boxes, and a lot of forced jokes, so I would not cry. When I packed the last of my stuff, I shoved the wedding dress into a donation bag without even unzipping it, because keeping it felt like storing a ghost. The months after that were less dramatic on the outside and more brutal on the inside, because that is how healing works, apparently. People think moving on looks like smiling in a new outfit with a new haircut. For me, it looked like waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing because I had dreamed he was calling, and I could not answer. It looked like standing in the grocery store and suddenly crying in the cereal aisle because I saw a brand of cookies we used to buy. And yes, I know that sounds ridiculous, but grief does not care if you are embarrassed. Therapy became this weekly appointment where I would walk in trying to be composed and then immediately start venting like I had been holding my breath all week. I talked about the trip, the lies, the humiliation, the money, the way my parents reacted, the way his friends acted like I was a cartoon villain. And my therapist kept bringing me back to this idea that my boundaries were not the problem. The problem was the people who benefited from me not having boundaries. I had to untangle so many patterns. How I had been trained in my own family to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to be reasonable. How that made me a perfect target for someone who wanted a partner who would swallow disrespect. I started noticing how often I apologized automatically, even when I was not wrong. I started noticing how often I said yes just to avoid tension. It was like discovering my own software had been programmed by other people. Financially, it was tight. Those cancellation fees had hit my savings hard, and splitting the shared debt was a constant fight. He refused to pay, so I talked to a lawyer. Not for some big dramatic legal battle, just a simple consultation where the lawyer looked at my paperwork and basically said, "You can try, but it might cost more than you'll get." So I did the painfully adult thing. I paid it down myself over time because I wanted him out of my life more than I wanted revenge. Some days I hated that about myself because I wanted him to feel it. But peace has a price, and apparently mine came with interest rates. I also lost friends. Not in a dramatic blow-up kind of way. More like they faded because they did not want to deal with the discomfort of choosing a side. They would send one thinking of you message and then disappear. Or they would say, "I'm staying out of it," like neutrality was moral. I learned that a lot of people prefer harmony over truth, and that is how bad behavior survives. I started doing small things for myself. Not in a new me way, more like tiny acts of rebellion against my own sadness. I took myself to a movie alone and did not hate it. I bought new sheets because the old ones reminded me of him. I invited friends over and let them see my messy apartment without apologizing. I went on a couple of awkward dates, not because I was ready, but because I wanted to prove to myself that my life was not over. One date talked about himself for 2 hours. I smiled and nodded, then went home and texted my therapist. "Is it too early to swear off humanity?" She replied something comforting. I rolled my eyes, but I felt less alone. My parents stayed distant. My mother would send little messages on holidays, things like, "Thinking of you." But there was always this unspoken condition under it, like she was waiting for me to soften, come back and pretend nothing happened. I did not. I could not. Not without losing myself again. By the time 6 months had passed, I was not healed, but I was different. I could talk about him without shaking. I could say my ex-fiancé without feeling like I was swallowing glass. I could sit in silence without immediately reaching for my phone like it was an emotional inhaler. I know that sounds small, but when you have been living in constant emotional noise, quiet is a miracle. Almost a year after the wedding that never happened, I had a moment that felt like the universe checking in to see if I was actually moving on or just pretending. I was out with friends at a restaurant downtown. One of those places that tries to feel cozy but is mostly loud. We were halfway through our meal when I looked up and saw him. He was across the room at another table with coworkers laughing like a normal person. For a second, my brain did that stupid thing where it flashed back to us laughing together, and I felt that old reflex to soften. Then my stomach dropped because my body still remembered the betrayal, even if my mind wanted to be calm. I froze with my fork midair. My friend noticed and asked what was wrong. I just mouthed him. My friends immediately offered to leave, switch seats, or cause a scene because they are protective like that. But I did not want to run. I did not want to be the woman who leaves every room he enters. So I stayed. I forced myself to take a sip of water. My fingers felt a little unsteady, but I kept breathing. Of course he noticed me. He stared for a moment, like he was not sure it was really me. Then he did this thing where he composed himself and stood up like he was about to be polite. He walked over, and I could see his coworkers watching, curious, like they were about to witness a reunion. He smiled tight and careful and said, "Hey," like we were old classmates. I said "hey" back, and it sounded strange in my mouth. He asked how I was. I said I was good, which was true enough in that moment. He said he was working on himself, and I almost laughed because that phrase has become such a generic apology for men who realize their actions have consequences. He asked if I wanted to talk sometime. I said no. Calmly. His face twitched like he had not expected a hard no in public. He tried to soften it by saying he just wanted closure. I said I already got it. I saw him flinch, because closure is easier when it is mutual. This was not mutual. I was not there to help him feel better about himself. The whole interaction lasted maybe 2 minutes. It was not explosive. It was not dramatic. It was just flat. He was not my person anymore, and I could feel that in my bones. When he walked back to his table, my friends stared at me like they were waiting for me to collapse. I did not. I felt a little shaky, sure, but I also felt this strange emptiness, like the anger had finally left and there was just space. Afterward in the car, my friend asked how I felt. I said, like I just talked to someone I used to know. That was the most honest thing. It was not that I forgave him. It was that I did not want him anymore. And there is a difference. A few weeks later, a mutual friend reached out and told me my ex was telling people he was trying to grow and that I was still mad. I remember sitting on my couch reading that message and thinking, I'm not mad. I'm just not participating. He wanted me to either forgive him or hate him loudly because both options kept him central. Indifference removes the stage. That was when I really started feeling like I was getting my life back. Not because I was dating someone new. Not because my parents suddenly apologized because they did not. But because my emotional weather was no longer dictated by his presence. I could have a good day without it being interrupted by rage. I could make plans without calculating whether I might run into him. I could buy groceries without scanning every aisle for a ghost. And yes, I still had moments where I felt lonely, where I questioned everything, where I wondered if I would ever fully trust someone again. But those moments did not control me anymore. They were just weather passing through. By then, I had built a new routine and convinced myself I did not need any more information to feel sure. About 15 months after the cancellation, I got the confirmation I did not even know I had been waiting for. It came in the most casual, gossipy way possible, because of course it did. I was getting coffee with a friend, someone who still floated around that old social circle, when she hesitated and said, "Can I tell you something?" The tone alone made my stomach tighten. She told me that during that whole trip, a time zone away, my ex had cheated. Not just once, either. With someone in the extended group. Someone they had met during the trip, and apparently it had been treated like a joke by the guys. She said there were other men on that trip who cheated too, including some who were already married. The whole thing had been this ugly little bubble where they acted like being across the country meant consequences did not exist. She said a bunch of relationships blew up afterward and people had been quietly keeping score, like it was all just drama for entertainment. I stared at her and waited for the pain to hit because I assumed it would. Cheating is supposed to be a dagger. But what I felt was relief. Deep, validating relief. It was like my body finally unclenched in a way I had not even realized it was still clenched. Because if he cheated, then the whole uptight fiancé narrative was even more ridiculous. It was not me being intense. It was him being guilty and projecting. I told her I was not surprised. She looked surprised that I was not surprised, and I almost laughed because, girl, I had been living in this story for over a year. I knew my cast. She asked if I wanted details. I said no. I did not need to picture it. I did not need the mental images. I just needed the fact. When I got home, I sat on my couch and stared at the wall for a while. I thought about the night I found those photos. How my whole body shook. How I wondered if he was dead. How I blamed myself for panicking. I felt this wave of anger, but it was not as sharp as before. It was more like steady disgust. He let me believe he was missing while he was out there acting single. Then he came back and cried on my doorstep like I was the cruel one. I also thought about my parents. How they told me I was being stubborn. How they implied I was ruining my life. How they treated the wedding like a sacred event and my feelings like an inconvenience. I felt this heavy sadness because I realized they would never fully admit they were wrong. Even if I handed them proof, they would find a way to make it about my attitude. I did not tell my parents about the cheating right away. I told my therapist instead. She asked me what I wanted to do with the information. I said, I want to feel validated. She asked, do you need their validation to feel that? I hated that question because it was true. Also, sometimes you want the people who hurt you to admit it. You want them to look you in the eye and say, you were right. It feels childish, but it is human. I did tell a couple of friends because I needed to say it out loud, and they reacted the way my family never did. They got angry for me. They said he's trash, and I'm so glad you didn't marry him. I sat there and let their anger wrap around me like a blanket. Yes, I know that sounds dramatic, but when you have been told you are wrong for so long, having someone be loudly on your side feels like medicine. If I had stayed, if I had swallowed it for the sake of peace, I would have married a man who thought a trip to the other coast was a free pass. I would have been legally tied to his parents and their excuses to his friends and their cruelty to a life where my boundaries were always negotiable. That thought, more than anything, made me feel grateful for the version of myself who canceled everything while her voice wobbled. She did not know the future, but she knew enough. I did not hear from my mother directly for a long time, which should have felt like peace, but mostly felt like an ache that changed shape. 18 months after the wedding that was not my mother called me from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not pick up because unknown numbers feel like danger now. But something in me said it was her, and I was right. The second I heard her voice, my shoulders tensed, like my body was bracing for impact. She did not start with an apology. She started with this careful, hesitant tone, like she was walking on ice. Hi, honey. I said, hi, because I am still wired to be polite even when I am angry. There was an awkward pause where neither of us wanted to be the one to say the real thing. Then she said, I've been thinking about everything. In her language, that usually means she is about to justify herself. She said maybe she had been too hard on me back then. She said she was sorry if I felt unsupported. If I felt. That little qualifier made my jaw clench because it was the classic non-apology. The focus was on my feelings, not her actions. She said she had done what she thought was right as a mother. She said she wanted peace. She said she had not wanted me to throw away my life over pride. Pride. Like my boundary was ego. Then she casually dropped a piece of gossip like it was a neutral fact. She said my ex was engaged again to someone he had met not that long ago. The community was talking, and his family was acting like nothing had happened, planning a new wedding, like the last one had not ended in flames. My mother said it with this weird tone, half scandalized and half impressed. Then she said, see, he moved on. I felt a flare of anger because it was so obvious what she was doing. She was implying I should feel bad, like I had lost something valuable, like my choice had been a mistake. She wanted me to regret. She wanted me to come back humbled and admit she had been right to pressure me. I took a breath, and I surprised myself with how calm my voice was when I said, I didn't lose him. She went quiet. I could almost hear her recalculating. I said I avoided him. There's a difference. She tried to argue, of course. She said marriage is hard. People make mistakes. You work through things. I said, he disappeared across the country, blocked me, cheated, and admitted he wanted me to cancel so he didn't have to end it. I said it like I was reading a grocery list. Not because it did not hurt, but because I was done making my pain sound more polite for other people. She tried to pivot, saying she did not know about the cheating. I said, you didn't want to know. That was the first truly honest thing I had ever said to her without softening it. She made a small noise like she was offended and said she always wanted what was best for me. I said, you wanted what looked best. Another silence. Then she asked if I was coming to a family gathering next month. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so typical. She wanted to skip over everything and go back to the performance of family where we pretend we are close. I told her I did not know yet. She said, "Your father misses you." I said he can call me because he could. He just did not. And I was done chasing. So I told her the truth, the one that had been sitting in my throat for months. I said, "I'm not waiting for you to approve of my choices anymore." I said it gently, but firmly. I told her I loved her because I do. In that complicated way you love parents even when they hurt you. But I said I was not going to shrink myself to make things comfortable for her. I said I would be in contact when I was ready, not because she guilted me, but because it was my decision. She started crying then. Real crying, maybe. Or shocked crying. She said she never meant to hurt me. I said I know, because I think she believes that. But intent does not erase impact. We ended the call awkwardly, with no big resolution, and no movie moment. Just this heavy, quiet